This episode is brought to you by my Fertility Awareness Mastery online self-study program. Learn fertility awareness from the comfort of your own home at your own pace for a fraction of the cost. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/mastery for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/mastery. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 387. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of two beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. Today's episode, I think, is an interesting follow-up to last week's episode. So last week, I shared my interview with Justine Bold, and she shared her experience, her fertility journey, as well as her experience of pregnancy in her mid-40s. And in today's episode, I'm sharing my interview with Parijat Deshpande, and she specializes in high-risk pregnancy. And so when I was doing the interview with Justine Bold, I just couldn't help but think about this conversation that I had with Parijat. So if any of you have, not only had challenges conceiving, but had a pregnancy that fell into the high risk category that was very stressful, or if you are in that situation right now, or if it ever comes up in the future, today's episode will really kind of open your eyes to some of the challenges that women face in this area, but also some of the ways that you can really work through it, I would say. And of course, with the goal of increasing your chances of having a healthy pregnancy, and of course, having the pregnancy go as close to full term as possible. Before we jump in, I'll just tell you a little bit about Parijat. Parijat is the leading integrative high-risk pregnancy specialist, somatic trauma professional, and speaker and author who guides women to improve their pregnancy complications so they can reduce their risk of preterm birth. Her unique neurobiological approach has served hundreds of women to manage pregnancy complications and reclaim a safety and trust in their bodies that they thought was eroded forever. Parijat is the author of the bestselling book, Pregnancy Brain, a mind-body approach to stress management during a high-risk pregnancy. She's also the host of the popular podcast, Delivering Miracles, that discussed the real, raw side of family building, including infertility, loss, high-risk pregnancy, bed rest, prematurity, and healing once the baby comes home. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode with Parijat. And today I'm really excited to be here with Parijat. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. We were just reminiscing in the pre-chat because about 1.5 years-ish ago, we actually met in person, which was super fun in California. I was in your area. But today we're here to talk about a serious topic. We're here to talk about trauma and stress and how it can affect pregnancy. And so I'd love just to start, just to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and share with us what work you do in this particular field, but also why, what was it that inspired you to actually do this work? It's not a common thing that I've seen a ton of women in the kind of pregnancy, stress, trauma space. So let us know why you ended up doing this work.
Absolutely. It was not intentional at the beginning. Or maybe it was, I guess, because as a young child, I wanted to be an OBGYN. So I guess somewhere in there, I needed to be in the women's health space, I knew. But my actual training, my professional training was in clinical psychology initially. And I was, doing my own work and all, seeing clients and teaching at the university and all. And it was really my personal experience of having gone through this and having been the patient that got me to see where the gaps are in the medical care and in the mental health care, and how we separate those two and create an even bigger gap in a way that is doing a tremendous disservice to women going through high-risk pregnancies. So we were one of those couples where we knew we would have trouble conceiving. We were not one of those couples that tried for years and years and then found out I had health issues that were known. And so we jumped into fertility treatment pretty early. I was still in my 20s when we started. And my first pregnancy ended in a ruptured ectopic, which was really terrifying and eye-opening for us to realize that there is not just a chance at losing a child, but also, in addition to that, there could be a risk to my life in the process. And I think that whole experience was just really scary and really eye-opening about what could lie ahead. And it was the first time that the seed had been planted for me that there's no way that I can move forward with another cycle if I didn't also feel comfortable in my whole body to be able to do this again, right? Because now suddenly getting pregnant and being pregnant felt scary. It was suddenly just this really different experience than we'd anticipated. And so when we took some time off, and then we started with IVF. And the first cycle I got pregnant, but I developed my very first pregnancy complication before I even knew I was pregnant. I'd finished, it was called a paracentesis, which is where they remove fluid from your pelvic cavity when you have what's called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And I was like dizzy and really woozy. And my husband was like massaging my legs because they were aching and stuff. My doctor poked it. He's like, "Congratulations, you're pregnant." I'm like, "What are you saying? I don't know. What are you saying?" And that was just kind of the beginning of what the pregnancy kind of was like. And it just snowballed from one complication to two, then three, then four. I was put on modified activity restrictions from week 6 in pregnancy. I stopped working early in the first trimester. And I remember thinking, especially as I went into kind of the early second trimester, thinking, I am so nervous all the time because I am terrified of losing this child. And I don't know how I could feel any differently. How is it possible to expect me to not feel anxious right now? And that's where my head started going of, if I walked into the office of somebody who was trained like me in clinical psychology, I know what they would say to me. And finally, as the patient, that's when I realized that's not what I needed. I wanted to know, how do I stay pregnant? How do I manage these complications where the anxiety is not playing a role in me having more complications or things getting worse? And that really solidified when I landed in the hospital at 22 weeks and 4 days. I was 3 centimeters dilated. And the next morning, the medical team came in, and I'd gotten to know them very well by that point. And they sat on my bed, and my OB had tears in her eyes, and they were preparing us to lose this child because it was too early in the pregnancy and I had too many complications. And I said, "Okay, sure. I hear all that. I am ready for all the medical treatment that you can throw at me. I recognize that you're telling me what the limitations of those treatments are. But there's one other thing that nobody is telling me to do. And I just have this feeling it's going to help." And they were very sweet. And they were like, "Okay, sure, Parijat, you can try that. No problem." I know they just felt terrible for me, and they wanted me to feel like I was doing something for myself. But I had this gut feeling there's something else. And so what I told them was, I'm going to manage my body, and I am going to address kind of everything that's going on inside of my body. I'm not talking about my thoughts. I'm not dealing with anything like that. I'm going into my body, and I'm going to modulate what's happening in my body. You give me the medications, I'll do this, and let's see what happens. They said, "You've got 72 hours. We think you're probably going to lose your baby within 72 hours. And when I committed to this, we actually were able to extend my pregnancy by 15 days. And he was born at 24 weeks and 5 days, which is really early, but just late enough to give him a chance at life. And when that happened and I saw and I was experiencing that happening, and I went, I don't have any special superpowers here. I'm not some magical person. Everybody should be able to do this. Everybody can do this. I need to teach them how to do this. Because if I can get a few days to give my son a chance at life, imagine what we can do if we can teach women how to do this from the beginning of pregnancy, from before pregnancy. Imagine what we can do to the preterm birth rates in this country if we can show women that there's another solution in addition to medical care that is going to help them stay pregnant. And that's essentially how I came to do this work.
Wow, that is an incredible story. And so take us through a little bit. So for the listeners who are kind of looking for a little bit of context, so maybe in your case, what you said was that you already knew that you had a predisposition to certain complications. So you were kind of going into this already knowing that there were a lot of things that it's like, what could go wrong kind of thing. And even with that knowledge, it's in some ways it helped, I'm sure, to prepare you, but in some ways it probably made it worse because you knew all of the things that could potentially happen. So I think for, the average listener, it's natural and normal to be nervous when you get pregnant, especially before the 3-month mark, especially if you've suffered from miscarriage previously, which is very, very common. That's something we've talked about on the show many times. It's just, you don't even realize how common it is until you have a miscarriage. And then you have some conversations with anyone you know, and you realize that most of the people you know have had one. It's crazy. So talk to us a little bit more about that. And during your pregnancy, you don't have to go into all the details, but some of the things that came up, because you mentioned you knew the staff very well, all these, you had already kind of been in and out. So share with us some of the things that were happening and I suppose how that affected you in terms of your stress levels.
Yeah.
What you actually did to resolve it and kind of what you wish you would have known at the beginning of this process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the scariest things was the fact that I could feel something happening before anybody else could recognize it. So before it showed up in blood work or before it showed up on an ultrasound, and sometimes it was just a matter of a couple hours before I got in to see a physician, but I was living with that sensation, right? For example, bleeding during pregnancy. This is one that I see with my clients so often where there's a history of you know what it's like to be bleeding. And especially when you've experienced a loss, it is absolutely terrifying. And you're sitting there all by yourself and nobody else can share that with you. Nobody else can participate with that. Of course, my husband was there and he was waiting in the waiting room with me and he was nervous in his own way about what's going to happen. What are they going to tell us? But that physical sensation of bleeding, of cramping, of leaking fluid, of, any number of things, swollen joints, swollen hands, swollen feet, elevated blood pressure, your heart racing, all those things, those physical sensations, only you experience. And even if a monitor, a blood test, a scan can validate what you're feeling, you have those body memories that you are creating, experiencing that all on your own. And I think that was absolutely terrifying. And so one of the things I wished that I had known that is part of what I teach now is how to manage those body sensations, right? What do you do when you experience those body sensations so that it doesn't send you into a panic every time? How do you convey what you are feeling in a way that your physician or your medical team can hear to take you seriously so you're not blown off the first, the third, the fifth time you're trying to raise a concern and saying, no, I know the blood work said something different, but this doesn't feel right. Or I know the ultrasound didn't show it, but something doesn't feel right. How do you get your team to listen to that, right? Because I think even though you are the only one that can physically sense these things, we can't do this alone. We have to have a team around us, and that includes our medical professionals. If you have a partner, that includes partners or loved ones, family, friends, other providers outside of traditional Western medicine, whoever that may be, to help carry that load. You cannot do it on your own. And so I think those are a couple of things that came to mind as I was building this work that I wanted to do, was what was missing. And I think this was one of those things that was really missing, is how can somebody help share that load? How can somebody help me convey what's going on that only I can feel, but really needs to be taken very seriously?
There's a lot of parts of what you said that I want to dive into, but I think the place where I want to start, I was thinking of, if we're talking about the effect of stress on pregnancy and how feeling really anxious and scared can contribute to the potential to lose the baby. So it's almost like, and I know it's not, but it's almost like we're blaming the woman. So with the whole thing with being pregnant in the first place, I mean, the whole thing with fertility and having challenges, even though statistically speaking, 40 to 50%, that is half of the time, it is related in some way to male factor, we're still the ones. So if you're having trouble conceiving, even if it's male factor, it's like, it's you. And then if you are pregnant and then you have a miscarriage, you feel like it's you. And then if you feel like if things are happening, if you're bleeding, if you're having different challenges that are happening, that obviously would indicate that you're at a higher risk for a miscarriage. It's you. And now you're scared. And then because you're scared, it's making it worse. So how do you address that with, with the women that you work with? Because obviously that it's like, I can't do anything right. And now that I'm stressed, it's also going to make it worse. And ultimately, I mean, there are women who have pregnancies that don't have these issues. So arguably, like, yes, the stress can make it, I'm trying to say, like, it's such a complicated space to kind of deal with.
It is a complicated space. Absolutely. And what I like to start with is we often take on that blame of stress, for example, very specifically, when we misunderstand what stress actually is. In kind of lay language, stress has come to mean it's this emotional reaction that I'm having to something that feels really overwhelming or feels scary or feels unknown or something like that. And that's where I think we need to begin, is by correcting that definition, that stress is not a subjective feeling. It is actually a physiological chain reaction that happens outside of conscious awareness when your brain perceives a threat. And when we can really understand that, we can get to the root that you had no choice. You didn't choose to feel this way. You didn't choose to feel fear. You never chose to feel anxious or to feel stressed or overwhelmed. Your body is doing what it needs to do to keep you alive and safe because something feels threatening or dangerous. In my case, and in the case of a lot of women that I work with, it's the very fact of being pregnant, having complications, going through certain milestones in the pregnancy, especially if you have a complicated history before, that very experience physiologically, this is all happening outside of conscious awareness. Thoughts are too slow to be able to keep us alive and safe, but our nervous system is not. And so it works on that level. And I think when we understand that, and this is why in my book, I use the example of the bear chase, because you're not thinking about how to keep yourself safe. You are actually, this is happening at a physiological level, at a cellular level that does not respond to thoughts or any kind of cognitive interventions whatsoever. And I think when we understand that, then it adds a level of compassion, because we can start to look at, these experiences I'm having, for example, my heart rate goes up, or I feel really hot when I get stressed. Those are things that are happening that your body is doing to keep you safe right now. Because there's no actual bear to run away from, we feel it differently than if we were actually in the woods running. But your body is actually doing something to keep you alive and safe right now, to keep your baby alive and safe right now. Your body is trying to keep you pregnant. And I think that's really important, so that it's not, the stress is not causing the complication. The stress is not causing the loss, but there are physiological changes that happen that, if they are sustained, puts you at risk for complications or exacerbation of complications because of what it does to the endocrine and immune system during pregnancy, which we know kind of increases those odds. But none of it is happening at the conscious level. You're not doing anything to cause this, because it is happening at the cellular level where we have no ability to choose.
Well, that's a really important way, I think, to look at it. I think the hard thing, because I always feel like I'm in the mind of the listeners. It's like, well, all that's well and good, but like, this is an emotional thing if I'm pregnant and I love my baby and I don't want to lose my baby. So it's kind of like, I totally hear what you're saying, but I'm still freaking out. And nothing you say is going to stop me from freaking out because I'm still freaking out. So talk to us about some of the strategies, because you mentioned that you were in the situation very like acute where you were 22 weeks and 4 days pregnant. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like it was kind of imminent that you were going to miscarry, but you did something to extend that period of time. And we'll never know if you would have employed these strategies from the beginning of your pregnancy. You know, I think every mother can look back at their, previous pregnancies. It's like, if I would have known, I would have done everything differently, but we can't ever go back. So share with us some of the specific strategies that you did then, and also how you've adapted some of those strategies now that you work with women in this field. For anyone who's listening, who tuned in for that reason, maybe they are having, they're bleeding right now. Like maybe they're having, or they have had some spotting. And so they're really kind of like freaking out. And I mean, understandably so.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would start with what you had asked earlier about, well, how do I can't stop freaking out. I'm freaking out right now. And yes, you are. And not freaking out is not the goal. Not freaking out is not the goal. You are a mother who is afraid of losing your child. Of course, you're going to be freaking out. Of course you are. So nowhere in my work with my clients is the goal for you to feel zen, calm, super chill, everything's fine. That's not possible. Let's be really honest here. I typically work with women who've experienced late-term losses or preterm delivery. And so they've been through it. Like there's no point in the pregnancy for my clients where they feel like, okay, and now everything's fine. Because they've lived through it. They know that at any point something can happen. So the goal is never to stop freaking out. The goal is to figure out what your body needs that has caused that freak out. Okay. Now, oftentimes the answer is, well, I just need my baby to be fine. I just need to hold my baby, right? Which is not actually how it works, because the fear that we hold on to in our bodies comes with us postpartum if we don't deal with it during pregnancy, or if we don't deal with it pre-pregnancy, right? So let me explain that in a little bit more concrete terms. When we are let's take the example of the bear chase, right? You're out camping and you hear the rustling in the leaves. And what do we all do at first? When we're out camping, whether we're alone or we're with people, we turn to each other and we look and we go, oh, what's that? Did you hear that? Was that something? And we all kind of turn towards the leaves and we go, is it going to happen again? I don't know. Eventually the bear comes out and we all run, right? And at some point, some of us will stop and we'll hide in a cave. Some of us will keep running. Some of us will climb a tree. We'll all do these things, but we're trying to get away from the bear. In that moment, thinking is not required. Talking is not required. Understanding complex things is not required beyond run, hide, duck, over here, right? That's the kind of way that we're going to be talking to each other. And the only goal we have in that moment is to find our car, get in, and drive away. Right? The same thing is happening when you're going through a pregnancy or you're preparing for a pregnancy after loss, after preterm delivery. If you're going through complications, that's your bear, right? And so all of these things are not available to us. We cannot think ourselves, we can't tell ourselves, everything's fine. The doctor said everything's fine. Look, the baby looks good on the scan. I should feel calmer now. But you don't, right? Because we can't think ourselves there. So we've got to go deeper and we have to go, what does my body need right now to feel that safety, right? Because when we get to the car, we're running through the woods, we get to the car, there's a very predictable pattern that our bodies go through to get us from bear chase to everything's actually fine. And none of it involves our thinking. So if you can imagine, you get in the car, everybody piles in, you turn on the car and you just gun it and you go. And a couple minutes later, you notice how hot you're feeling. You start taking off your jacket. Notice how sweaty your hands are. You notice how much your heart is beating. And then you start hearing the music on the radio. And then you turn to the people around you and go, can you believe that just happened? What just happened? You start talking about it, right? You start coming down. That is a very predictable physiological pattern that happens in our bodies. That is the pattern that we want to start to activate in your body before and during pregnancy over and over and over. Because if we don't activate that, you get stuck in the bear chase, and that's what we call trauma, right? And so how do you do that? One, you have to be able to feel your body. Can you feel your body? When we're running away from the bear, we don't feel our bodies. We're not supposed to. We don't need to. It's not essential for survival. So you have to begin there. Can you feel your body? The second is, can you activate all of your senses, right? Can you see, smell, touch, taste? Typically, when I ask that question to my clients at the beginning, they go, yeah, sure, I can smell stuff. I say, can you smell it, or do you know you smell it? Like, do you know what the smell of the rose is, or can you actually smell the rose? And when you start to pay attention to that, you realize some or all of your senses have gone offline, as they're supposed to in the bear chase. And so all we're doing is we're reverse engineering the physiological stress cycle to get you down to that I'm in the car driving home place. And that's really where the work begins.
Well, what you're describing there sounds a lot like grounding. So in a previous, phase of my life, I did some work as a counselor for women who had experienced sexual trauma. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we talked about in those situations, especially depending on the situation, with the kind of PTSD aspect of it, which is when you are kind of re-experiencing and reliving what's happening, is to ground yourself. And so I remember talking about things like, putting your feet on the ground, like you said, feeling your body, not as eloquently coming from me, but it was literally like tapping the ground, kind of like actually getting yourself present and getting yourself in the moment and kind of remembering even where you are.
Yeah.
So that you know that you're no longer in that place, even though you're having that experience and feeling that experience. So it sounds very similar in that respect.
Yeah, it is very similar. In this field, it's called orienting. But yeah, it's very similar of you're basically increasing your sensory awareness, again, to the present. Because what happens when you are in that threatening position, or when you have a memory of that threatening moment, like a pregnancy complication, preterm delivery, a loss, something like that, is we get taken out of our bodies, like I was talking about, right? Because you don't need to be in your body to run away from the bear. It's not essential. And we don't ever come back to it, which is what trauma is, right? And so we're then responding to a body memory that we have that is not actually happening right now, but of what our body and our cells remember. And that's where we have to begin. It is not the whole thing. It's not enough, because beyond that, then we have to do something with that trapped survival stress that has been kind of built up in our bodies to sustain us through that fight or that run through the woods. We have to discharge that from our bodies. And then we've got to re-regulate the nervous system. And all of that has to happen in a very individualized way. It all shows up in our bodies very differently, and we experience it differently, and we discharge it differently. And so at that point is where it's really important that you know and understand what your body is going through, what it needs, where that survival stress is trapped. And then you add on the layer of pregnancy, is that actually changes week by week because of just the basic biology of pregnancy on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's what I really liked about what you said, was that it's not about like ignoring reality. So often there's these kind of ideas that float around, because like you said, we think of stress as an emotional thing. And this is interesting because given my work with the menstrual cycle, I often have to kind of, talk about this, even comparing acute stress to chronic, and really understanding that even though you don't feel stressed out necessarily, quote unquote, emotionally stressed out, you can see in the menstrual cycle how that chronic stress, for example, is affecting your cycle. And the chronic stress sometimes it has to do with nothing that is emotional. Sometimes it has to do with the fact that you're not sleeping, and the fact that you're not necessarily eating that well, and all those things. And that and inflammation and those types of things. And then obviously like trauma reliving itself in the background all the time can also so I think this it's really interesting, some of those similarities, because it's really, because then what happens is we have a society that's like, oh, you're stressed out. We think it's purely emotional all the time, and it has to be something that's happening now.
Yeah.
And then we think, oh, the solution, well, just go meditate it away and like blah, blah, blah. And so it's like really, and then when you talk about stress management, people are like, oh, you want me to go and like sit on a lotus flower? Like, it's just, but this is like what we think about, and it's useless. It's not useless. That was a strong word, but I said it because it basically downplays the reality of what's happening in your body, so I'd love to hear your comments on that.
Yes, I agree 1,000%. And I think what I would add to that is that those tools, meditation, mindfulness, journaling, gratitude practices, lotus flowers, all of those things are great tools to have, but they have a time and place for them. And I keep going back to that bear analogy because I think it really highlights and takes us out of the present situation to visualize what's happening. You would never sit on a lotus flower as you're running away from a bear. You would never do it. And it sounds ridiculous when I say that, but that's what we're trying to do is we're using these tools at the wrong point of the stress cycle. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with those tools. It's just the timing is entirely wrong. You cannot meditate yourself to safety. You've got to find safety. You got to create that safety at your nervous system first, then do all the gratitude practices and the journaling and the lotus flowers you want. It's fantastic. And it will actually benefit you at that point. But you've got to know where you are in that cycle first and know what your body needs at that point of the cycle to move forward in the cycle, to know when to use some of these tools. And I think that's where it often feels it leaves people feeling really helpless because they know that they want to feel better and they're trying everything they can think of and they're just not feeling better. And I think what breaks my heart is when I hear from a lot of women afterwards when they say, well, maybe this is just my new normal. This is just how I'm always going to feel because I went through something so horrible. And that it's just not true. What you went through is horrible. That's not undeniable. Absolutely. And you can heal from it. It is absolutely possible if we follow physiology to be able to support your body in the way that it needs at the points that it needs it.
Well, let's talk about, I suppose, getting into the meat of it, which is there's a lot more examples that are there, but I'll just give the example of miscarriage. And I mean, the word miscarriage encompasses so much, pregnancy loss as well, because so in my personal experience, I experienced a miscarriage at 5 weeks, meaning it was 1 week after I would have had my period. And so my experience of that it was obviously very sad, but it's not, and I think this is something women do as well. And I'm doing it right now where I'm going to minimize my experience because obviously it's not as bad. I mean, objectively, it's not as bad in my opinion, which means I'm downplaying it actively. So I'm being an example of exactly the point I'm trying to make of women who are experiencing pregnancy loss later on in their pregnancy, or even a late term or stillborn child.
Yep.
So what I appreciate about the way that you approach this topic is that there's nowhere in there where you're actually downplaying her fear, because why wouldn't you be afraid? If you like, so we have to acknowledge, of course you are. And what I also really liked about what you said was that it's really not about saying it's okay. You're not you're not saying, like, I don't know if I'm just going to use affirmations as an example, but it's not like you had this horrible traumatic experience and you're saying like, everything's fine, everything, like over and over again. It's not like, this is not the solution. So maybe even as I say that, I'm just like, it just grinds me inside.
I know.
It's not, everything is not okay. And we can't sit around pretending. So talk to us a little bit about trauma. Yeah. And about this very real challenge that women who've gone through these just unimaginable experiences, how can they kind of cope then when they are pregnant and when things are going well, but of course they have this trauma hanging over their head?
Totally. I appreciate the example that you shared about your miscarriage, and because I think that plays really nicely into the importance of understanding trauma, which is that it has nothing to do with the outcome, the circumstances in which it happened. It is all about how it was encoded in your body at the time that it happened. And that is why a miscarriage at 5 weeks can be just as traumatic in one person's body as a stillbirth at 40 weeks or anything in between. It has nothing to do with the circumstances of what happened. And I really, really want everyone who's listening to really take that in, because just because you had a full-term baby, just because you had a low-risk pregnancy, just because you delivered with most of your birth plan in place, does not mean that you didn't experience it traumatically in some way, any point of the process. And I really want you to hear that. It's not about the event, it's about how it was encoded in the event. And so if we take that bear example again, trauma really is being frozen. Your nervous system is frozen, and therefore all other body systems are frozen in the run away from the bear, in that moment of you running through the woods, or you are hiding in a cave, or you are grasping onto that tree, or maybe you're trying to fight the bear. I don't know, right? Using that example to really just show you that you're frozen there. Your entire body, every cell of your body is frozen there. And so I highlight that because I want you to know, again, it's not your fault. Your body has not come back to safety yet. And so it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. So those stomach aches you're having, the heart palpitations you're having, the insomnia you're having, the issues with your menstrual cycle that might be showing up, it makes sense. You're not broken. It makes sense because your body is frozen in that moment of terror, right? And so what I very strongly recommend is get yourself back to safety before you're pregnant. Do it before you're pregnant. And I realize that sometimes there isn't a lot of time because you've got insurance issues, at least here in the United States. You know, if you're doing fertility treatments, there's some other factors in place that influence your timeline that may not be entirely in your control. And do the work as quickly as you can. At least begin the work as quickly as you can when you're ready before you're pregnant. Because when you can bring yourself back down to safety pre-pregnancy, you're going to have to continue the work through pregnancy. There's no end point here, right? And I say that going, I know people are really disappointed to hear that. Healing is not an end point. It's a lifestyle. We have to continually support our nervous system to remain in that safe mode over and over and over, just like going to the gym, just like taking a shower. We don't do it once and say, I'm done for life, right? Same kind of thing here. And the reason I say start early is if you can at least create the body experience of what does it feel like to be safe again. And if this, if your losses, your preterm delivery, your high risk pregnancy happened 6 months ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it might be, you may not remember what that feels like. And so if you can create that sensation and that actual physiological change pre-pregnancy, it's a lot easier to get to when you are pregnant because that work changes. The way you do it pre-pregnancy is going to be different in pregnancy because of the very fact that physiologically your body is changing every single day for those 40 weeks. And so if you've got that foundation already in place, it's a lot easier to do that work during pregnancy.
Just popping into today's episode to invite you to join my Fertility Awareness Mastery online self-study program. If you're looking for an informative and comprehensive DIY option for learning fertility awareness, I've got you covered. This program is the most comprehensive fertility awareness self-study program available. And the best part is you can learn at your own pace in your living room for a fraction of the cost of one of my live coaching programs. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/mastery for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/mastery. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. Well, and so tell us, is this about daily practices? Is this about, so when you're talking about this, what is coming to my mind, so correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of cultivating that practice of like being aware. So if you catch yourself not in your body, if you catch yourself really reflecting on some of those things. And like, I think that one of the things that I've experienced over the years is that if you can actually notice when you're really tense or notice when you're kind of not present, then at least you start to feel that, how do I say this? Like you start to feel that when you like, because before it was just normal because you're just like tense all the time and you don't really know that that's not like actually like the best kind of position to live your life in. And so is that what you mean, kind of learning to catch ourselves and learning to actually like make relaxed in the body normal? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah. So it's like we talked about earlier. So it's about ensuring that you can feel your body all the time, including when you feel triggered, when you remember when you're going through, anniversaries of losses, or a due date is coming up and you delivered preterm, like all those days, moments are coming up, those reminders are coming up. And in the happy moments, like, can you feel your body? And usually most people cannot, because those sensations are so overwhelming that we tune it out because we don't want to feel it, including joy. It is so scary and overwhelming to feel joy after you've been through something traumatic that we often disconnect from that as well. And so it's the practice of constantly being in your body. It is the practice of constantly keeping your senses available to you to be able to tolerate those sensations without the need to fix them or change them in any way. And that's the beginning of it. And then to recognize where your body is holding on to that survival stress. Where does it go? And then knowing what your body needs to discharge that survival stress so that you're not holding on to it anymore, all with the backdrop of also your other health situation, whether you're going through fertility treatment, you're currently pregnant, you're postpartum, all those factors come into play. And I think where people really have the hardest time is truly at the very beginning, is feeling your body, because it's scary and it's not you. And if you're having trouble with that, you're not doing anything wrong. It takes practice over and over and over to do it in a way that is not just overwhelming to you, but actually in a way that is healing.
Well, something that you said made me think of conversations I've had with many clients. I'm working with women who are experiencing fertility challenges often, and they've been trying for a long time, and they've potentially had losses, one or several, or they just have never had a pregnancy. And it's been a really long time. And so when you were talking and you kind of mentioned that not being able to feel joy, it's kind of like when you see the pregnancy test, now you're even more scared.
Yep, that's exactly it.
And then when you hear the heartbeat, you're even more scared because, and at no point do you actually like sit down and feel happy, because you won't let yourself feel happy, because then,
exactly.
Yeah. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that. I know one of the things, whether it's helpful or not, you can give me more insight, but I know one of the things and conversations I've had with a number of clients is I'll often encourage them to and so I'll tell you exactly how so any of my clients who are listening who've heard me say this to them before, but I'll often suggest to have, at least one moment of the day where you actually allow yourself to feel happy and you imagine that it does work out. And I always say, just give yourself 5 minutes, and then I promise you can stress yourself for the rest of the day. It's probably not the best advice, but at least it's making the point that if you never give yourself any time to just allow that, then you never, and now that we're having this conversation, I can understand better what you're saying, because if you never even have that, you're literally spending the whole time just actively stopping yourself from even acknowledging it, because you're so afraid. You don't want to get attached to the baby in case the baby's ripped away from you. So maybe talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this, again, ties nicely to the bear example, because you're not thinking about how wonderful it's going to be at home when you're running away from the bear, right? And that's often what we try to get ourselves to do is, I just got to be happy. I just got to focus. I got to be positive. But that's not where you are physiologically. That's not what your body needs right now. And when we are disconnected from joy, when we can't let ourselves feel it, I think there's a lot of pressure and a lot of shaming around that of, come on, you're pregnant now. Everything's going fine. Doctor said everything's great and all this stuff. And there's a feeling of, I should be happy. Everybody else around me is happy. Why am I not happy? And I want to remind everybody that's listening that, again, this is not a conscious choice you're making. We cannot feel joy if we don't feel safe. We cannot feel joy if we don't feel safe. And so if you are having trouble feeling happy about the number of follicles that are showing up on your ultrasound, or the pregnancy test, or the ultrasound, or the heartbeats, or anything like that, it's because it is your body telling you we don't feel safe going through IVF, going through this, a doctor's appointment, being pregnant, all of that. And the goal there, again, is to bring yourself down from that stress cycle, to go from fighting and running from the bear to actually being safe in your body. We can't feel safe if we don't feel our bodies, right? We can't feel safe if we can't sense our surroundings, and we can't feel safe if there's trapped survival stress inside our bodies. And so that's where the work really is. When you can release that from your body, when you can actually modulate your body from the muscles and the fascia and through posture and movement and all of these things, we don't then choose to feel joy. It just comes because now there is the ability to feel it because our physiology has actually shifted to support that feeling. So all in all, to say, don't blame yourself that you can't feel it, but take that opportunity to go, what does my body need to feel safe again? Because that's what is actually between where I am and where I want to be, which is to enjoy this pregnancy that I fought so hard for.
It sounds like what you're saying also is that if we've experienced trauma, and we could talk about that a little bit, like what is trauma? And I had a really interesting conversation with Kimberly Ann Johnson on the podcast. And we talked about the trauma of going to the doctor, because it's like legitimate trauma.
Yes, it is.
Oh my goodness. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. But it sounds like we're going through our lives and there's all these different things that happen to us along the way. And if certain things have happened along the way that have caused us, triggered us, caused us trauma, that we could very well be kind of in a constant state of stress. That could be, and if you're in a constant state of stress for a period of time, you stop recognizing that you're in a constant state of stress. So it sounds like this is the picture that you're drawing from us. And then you get pregnant and you're in this constant state of stress while pregnant, which is not good because it's not going to allow your body to do everything that it needs to do. And so it sounds like what you're saying is like the first step is to actually like reverse engineer. So it's not, the first step isn't about emotions. It's not about like your emotions are wrong. You need to the first step is literally about changing your physiology.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. And then that just changing your physiology, that's going to feel weird. I would imagine if you've been in a state of stress for a while, if you change your physiology and you actually realize how tense you've been and you kind of get in your body, a lot of things could happen. You could end up bawling for half an hour. Like who knows what could happen when you do that. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that and like how we could be so disconnected. Because this is like in the middle of what I do, helping women to not be so disconnected from the body. So often from my perspective, which is a little bit different, but you'll probably find it interesting, is that women who have been living in this constant fight or flight, when I look at their, like when they're charting, and then it's like the chart just demonstrates the stress in one way or another. It's almost like they're like, whoa, because they didn't even realize, they don't even think it's that bad. They're like, no, it's like, this is how it always is. And then when you see the chart, like freaking out, you're kind of like, this is real.
Yes, it is. And that's the thing about it, right? Is when we can talk about stress and any kind of stress, acute stress, chronic stress, and traumatic stress, it's all measurable. And it shows up in so many different parts of our body because the nervous system is tied to every single body system in our body. It will show up in some way or multiple ways. And we absolutely disconnect from our bodies. And when you start to do it, so I'm talking about, well, you've got to feel your body, you've got to feel your senses. It sounds very simple, and it is very simple because our bodies don't need a lot of complicated things, but it is not easy to do because the disconnection was your way of trying to maintain some semblance of safety while you are living in this mode of constant stress, right? Being at that point of running from the bear over and over and over every single day. And you're right, the thermostat actually changes and your new kind of floor becomes this constant level of survival. And we don't realize that actually dropping that floor down is really where our true baseline is for our particular body. And that baseline is different for all of us, right? There's no quantitative spot at which we all function best, right? Of course. But to get there can feel absolutely terrifying. I actually do not teach relaxation techniques for the first several months of our work together with my clients. Because if you try to do it, and you probably already have, if you're listening to this, maybe you've tried it, it's either you're not going to be able to concentrate on it, your brain will shut it off because it's like, no, we don't do this. That's what's happening. It's not your lack of focus or something like that. That's a protective mechanism. Or you're going to try it and it's going to feel so uncomfortable and so terrifying that either, like you said, you're going to end up bawling for half an hour, or you're going to feel this surge of anxiety and you're not going to know what to do with it. It could border on feeling like a panic attack is coming on. It could send you into a rage cycle. You're just angry and you can't really figure out why, but you're just something. This is your body protecting you from doing something at the wrong point of the stress cycle, right? You don't need to relax when you are running from the bear. You need to just get away from the bear. You need to create that sense of safety first. Safety comes first, always first. And so when we do these exercises and these tools, like we talked about earlier, we've got to be really mindful of, are we doing them at the right point of where my body actually is right now? And then when you do them, that you do them so gently and so softly and so slowly, so as not to overwhelm your system anymore. And I think that's where really understanding your body or working with somebody who can reflect that back to you is so important, because even if you're doing something gently, two people right next to each other, each of your bodies is going to need to do it at a very different pace and at a very different intensity than each other because of just your own bodies and your own physiologies.
Well, I mean, I think I have enough questions in my head that I could literally keep you for another half an hour. So I'll try to calm myself. But there's something that I want to ask you, which is, so what this sounds like to me is that when you get your body, when you use the word orient, and I was talking about grounding.
Yeah.
And so when you kind of do that, you're literally releasing, you're releasing, potentially stressed, tight muscles, and also figuratively. I'm sure that you've had this, well, I don't know, but I would assume that you've had an experience where it's like, but I can't do that because if I do that, I won't be able to function. I'm going to start crying and I'm never going to stop. So how do you totally have me. I'm right there. But for women who've had the intense traumatic experiences around pregnancy, around fertility challenges, around miscarriage, and in life in general, even if you've lost a parent and now you're pregnant and you're just, devastated that your parent will never see the child, there's so much that we go through. So how do you address that aspect of it? Because we're talking on the physiological level, and that to me sounds like, and depending on the person, that in of itself would be its own project to
Yep.
So you calm down, but now you have this flood of emotion. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing is that the orienting actually doesn't release. Orienting is entirely focused on just getting you back in your body. It won't release anything. And actually it feels pretty awful, to be honest, because you actually then feel how awful you feel in your body. And that's usually where people stop, because this feels terrible. Why would I want to feel this? And that's the whole point, is to actually notice it, and before you are able to release it. So there's several steps in between that. And the reason that I say that is because in orienting, you're right, that when you start to feel yourself first in the external environment, that in and of itself can be overwhelming. And so that's where I usually begin. Is I usually have a history of what they've been through, whatever they're willing to share. I actually don't need to know any of it until it affects their pregnancy, prenatal care health, which is a whole other level of support that I provide. But in terms of the healing piece, I don't actually need to know any of it. All I need to know is where you are in terms of being able to feel your body. And we work on external sensations first for this reason. We don't go to the memories. You don't need to tell me anything about what happened, what you've been through, what's coming up for you. You can if you want to, and there's a lot of conversations that we have. But I really want to highlight that because the traumatic stress, the chronic stress does not happen at a thought-based level. When we're reverse engineering, the thoughts come at the very end of it. So if you don't want to tell your story, you do not have to. You don't have to remember what happened in order to heal. None of that is required. And when we're talking then about that flood of emotion, if it ever feels like it's a flood, then it's like we've opened the door too fast. So we just have to figure out how to open it more slowly. And so sometimes, for example, the most commonly, I'll give you the example where most of my clients they're able to, at the beginning of our work, start to feel most of their body. They go, oh, I can feel actually my head, or, oh, I can actually feel my shoulders now, which sounds crazy when you think about it. But when you really notice, you'll find there are parts of your body you actually can't feel. Like, of course, you know you have a head, but you haven't realized how long you haven't felt your head actually in time and space and on your body, right? And so we are able to help them get to feeling most of their body, but for a long time, they cannot feel their pelvic region. They just can't do it. And so we don't touch it. We don't go anywhere near there. We say, okay, your body is going to start getting sensations from there when the rest of your nervous system starts to come closer to safety. If I went directly to that pelvic region, I said, put your hands on your pelvis, or, any other kind of, if they're doing, for example, I had a client who was doing pelvic floor PT and had to stop because it was so triggering for her, those sensations. And so we worked on actually slowing that down. And what we have to do is address it far more slowly, and sometimes from a very roundabout way. You do that, you should never experience that flood of emotions. It's intense, sure, but if it ever overwhelms you, that means it's happening too fast. And so we've got to kind of turn that dial back a little.
But no, that was really helpful. I feel like that really helps to make it less scary, to really understand what's happening and to really clarify that it's like you're focusing on your body, you're taking it slow. And tell me, this is kind of the way I'm thinking of it, but it's just a very practical strategy to start getting you out of that stress response so that you can have the positive effect of that. So one of the last questions I'll ask you then, in terms of pregnancy and this way of managing stress and really kind of focusing on even just being aware of how trauma has affected you. So talk to us a little bit about the positive impact that this can have on a pregnancy. Maybe even share, if you can, an example, but how, like, there's obviously a purpose why we're doing this. It's not just about feeling good when you're pregnant. It's obviously about a deep concern about the pregnancy and really wanting it to come to fruition. So talk to us a little bit about the positive effects of actually addressing these things before and during pregnancy.
Yes, I love this part because this is the part that makes me cry every time I see my clients with these results. So we talk about the nervous system, which is where the stress response begins. And that's chronic stress, acute stress, and traumatic stress. That nervous system, as we talked about, affects every body system. In pregnancy specifically, we're looking at its connection between that nervous system to the endocrine system and the immune system. And those three have to be in a very particular balance in order to support a healthy pregnancy. And that balance gets thrown off when we are living with chronic or traumatic stress. But when we can re-regulate that nervous system, it is so incredible. You can see the impact immediately. I have seen women who came to me mid-pregnancy, their preterm contractions stop. We can stop them at home so that I was thinking of a client who was going to labor and delivery and spending a night every couple of weeks at the very beginning of her or end of her second trimester, right at the edge of the third trimester. History of preterm delivery. So she was terrified it was going to happen again, kept going. And then she happened to find me and she's like, please help. And she never went again because she was able to stop them at home until she was actually ready to deliver, which ended up happening later than we anticipated. So we're like, okay, we're ready to come now. But I have many clients where you can see it on blood work. It shows up in the blood work. You can see it with blood pressure readings. That changes really, really quickly to the point where I remember having a client who had a history of hypertension in a previous pregnancy. She was at very high risk for it to happen again in her next pregnancy. It was a hypertensive disorder. And she was at the point where her medical team was ready to just pounce, ready to induce early. And she's like, I really don't want to deliver another preemie. Please give me a chance. And at that appointment, she was able to bring her blood pressure down and completely change how her body was feeling. So there was no more pain even. And the entire medical team was just blown away that this was even possible. It took her less than 5 minutes to do it when her reading was very high. It was very concerning. She said, give me a minute. 5 minutes later, totally normal. It's that level of power. And it's not because of what I'm teaching. I don't have a magic solution here. I'm literally teaching what your body is capable of doing. That's the power of this work. It's so amazing.
That is amazing. And so much hope, because often in those types of situations, from a medical perspective, there is no option. And this is what you need to do. And obviously throwback to the episode that I did with Kimberly Ann Johnson, sitting in the doctor's office, being told that there's no hope, having a team of doctors ready to take the baby, is obviously not relaxing.
Nope.
Just putting it out there. But no, this conversation has been so incredible. I feel like it's so eye-opening. And, for anyone who specifically tuned into this episode because they have experienced trauma or because they are pregnant already and they're going through all of the things, I feel like this has just been amazing. So as we wrap up, maybe let us know if you have any final thoughts for anyone who's listening, who's in that situation, or even if they're not yet in that situation. And then let us know a little bit more about you. Tell us about where we can find you online, about your book. Just tell us all, and about your programs. Tell us all the things.
Yeah. So I think what I would leave you with is just what you said. There really is so much hope. I work with women. I myself was this patient where I needed the medical system. I needed to be inside it. There's home birth and birthing centers and doing things more naturally were just not options for me. And that is not the case for most of my clients. And I get that. I hear that. And there is still so much hope, even when the medical system has kind of run out of options for you. And that hope doesn't come from a magic solution that somebody else has created. It is literally built inside your body. You are born with it and it's there. And it's just amazing when we can restore health to that nervous system, the incredible cascading effect it has on your whole health, both pre-pregnancy, during pregnancy, and as you heal after baby is born. It's just so amazing. So please don't ever forget that. Okay, share more about this. If you want to know more about the bear analogy, I'm going to go deeper into that. I have a book called Pregnancy Brain. And that's available at independent bookstores and Amazon and on Kindle. You can find that at pregnancybrainbook.com. Otherwise, I usually hang out on Instagram. I'm at healthy.highriskpregnancy. So come by, say hi, let me know what you took away from this conversation with me and Lisa. I'd love to hear about all of that. And then my website is my full name, parijatdeshpande.com, if you wanted to know more. I typically work one-on-one with clients through my Path to Baby program. That's all the way from conception through homecoming. And it is just my joy to be working with clients that way. I absolutely love it. So feel free to reach out if you'd like to know more.
Amazing. Well, we will make sure to link all of everything that you mentioned in the show notes page for today's episode if you're on the go, so that you can kind of jump in and find those connections. And I just want to thank you so much for being here and sharing this. This is really important work that you do. And you already know that this is not work that so many people do, that everyone's doing. And so it's so important. And so I'm so glad that you are bringing attention to this issue and supporting so many women, because without programs like this, we often can't really find that type of support that we so desperately need to manage, all these things that happen in life. So thank you for being you and for doing what you do and for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/387. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode of Parijat. I found it to be very eye-opening and I guess very reassuring that there's still so much you can do, even in the face of such adversity, giving hope to so many women, especially when the medical profession may or may not really be offering this type of support, most likely not. And it also is making me think of an upcoming episode, an episode that's coming up in a couple of weeks with one of my FAM students, my Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program students, who shared her birth story. It's a little bit different because it's not quite in the high-risk pregnancy category, but just a very stressful birth category. And so birth can be stressful at the best of times, but the world has been changing and many women have had a number of challenges and changes due to the current state of affairs in the world. And, depending on where you live, that can really, really affect your birth options, whether it be that you're not able to have a birth partner with you, or even the doula or midwife that you hired, depending on the restrictions. And so I feel that this episode is even more crucial just at this time when there's so many additional obstacles that many women may be facing related to birth and care and access and, all the things related to the various restrictions that some of us are subject to. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. If you know somebody who you feel that could really benefit from today's episode, then feel free to share. The link to share is fertilityfriday.com/387. With that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.